Middle East, 100% solved thanks to man at the Kudos Arena stopping Jew comedian. They stopped him, and everyone in the Middle East went, oh my God, let's just get along. We can't do that.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on the t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger?
Andy.
Oh, beat me to it.
Simultaneous.
Have you do you ever get those random LinkedIn messages from people you don't know?
Mate, I am probably the worst LinkedIn user ever, and partly because I have been a monogamous company loyalist for such a long time. So I don't tend to have the same kind of relationship to it than most professionals do in our age group. So, but I do, every now and then I do get some pretty random requests. I saw a weird thing the other day, actually. I don't know whether I'm just not used to it, but sponsored messages, like sponsored direct messages that pop to the top of your list.
Oh, yeah. I get those too. They're usually selling some course or something, some training of some description.
Yeah,
it's some foreign university.
It's all just awful. I don't know how you can stand to even log into LinkedIn.
Okay, so I'm going to say this. Anyone who listens to us that's like an avid LinkedIn user that cultivates an online presence on LinkedIn, I hate you. I really do. Like, seriously, get off this thing. I'm here to shake you out of your lack of self-awareness. Get off LinkedIn. It's all the people on LinkedIn are full of shit, self-promoters, up their own ass, and it's seriously, it's no good.
You know, what I do have some sympathy for the devil in terms of when you need to use it, when you've been made redundant or you actually are on your ass looking for a job, because there's nothing more painful than after, you know, something bad happens or people talk about when they've been retrenched or whatever, and then what do they give you as a parting gift? Some online course on how to polish your LinkedIn and do your networking and all this kind of stuff that is just excruciating. So I do feel sorry for the people who do have to use it because they literally need to network, right? So putting that aside though, when did it become a thing where like it's just all humble bragging? You know, it's like I'm pleased to, I'm pleased to announce that I'm starting a new position at so and so and so, and then watch the praise pouring in. Or my personal favorite, where it's like, I was honored to be asked to present on the panel of women's empowerment. And just like really what you're doing is self-promoting the fact that you've been on some panel somewhere, right? And it's just, I don't understand when it happened. Like when this built. Like I said, because I've been sleeping at the wheel and not having to use LinkedIn, I thought it was about getting a job, but it seems to be more like about brand and promotion now, right?
Oh, but see, this is the thing. I think the people who do that, and so the humble brag, like, so proud, so honored, humbled to be, anyone who starts a message that way on LinkedIn, like they're tarnishing themselves with this. Like this tag, like they will forever be known as like a thought of, like, because I think
it's an Australian thing. Maybe we're more sensitive to it in Australia.
Okay, possibly.
Americans love this stuff, man.
Yeah, but a lot of Australians are into it too, but I just think, like, to me, like, and like we both work professionally in jobs and involved in like, hiring and all that kind of stuff, right? The moment someone like is on LinkedIn. And they look spivvy. They look like they're self-promoters. All that sort of stuff.
Headshot.
Like the moment, like that's a very quick way of like categorizing, and it's hard to come back from that. Like, so I think just being your honest, true self. So if you do use like LinkedIn to literally, give an update every 5 years, or maybe, you're retrenched or something, you say, oh, look, had a good time here, but, it came to an end, really pleased for my service, but, looking for work now, that's it. If anyone knows of anything, let me know. That's it. Once every 5 years, that kind of a message. Hey, I'm okay with that. But it's the, the constant self-promotion and the photos and the tagging and the, give it a rest,
I just
everybody.
wonder how much, though, Andy, it's like, do people feel compelled to do it? Like they're losing the race if they don't do it? Or do they actually get enjoyment of it? And I don't know what the ratio is, right? Like, I think there's obviously a bit of both going on, and some people probably just, they cultivate, like you said, this online persona and brand and social credit. But there are some people that probably are compelled. They're like, if I don't do this, I won't, I'll be limiting my opportunities. But that's what I mean about the ickiness of it, right? I think that it's a very Australian thing to try to be humble. We have the whole tall poppy syndrome, right? We don't like anyone self-promoting, right? We don't like anyone thinking they're too big for themselves. But that is a part of business, unfortunately. Like, that is a part of business.
Well, this is how I'm going to frame it, right? If Instagram is for Gen Y, Facebook is for boomers, LinkedIn is for Gen X. Like, it's a very Gen X, like it's that whole, so like, I care about my, and all those things, like you said, like, do they enjoy it? Do they want to do it? I think it's addictive in the same way as the other platforms. I think it's the notification. It's like, how many likes have I had? How many people have seen me? I've got like another 100 connections,
But you know what, though, it is, though? Do you think, we've spoken about how sad it is, well, how sad I feel sometimes, and I think you don't think it, you think actually it's probably a badge of honor. But when you look at someone's Facebook profile and you scroll through their feed and all you see is year-on-year happy birthdays, like that's like the only entries, right? Happy birthday 2002, happy birthday 2003. Isn't it the same equivalent in LinkedIn when they give you
happy career anniversary?
Happy career anniversary. It's just like, that's the only time. This is like, so you can look at that two ways. You can be like, oh, this is really bad. This is sad. There's no connections. There's no engagement. Or you can be a badge of honor. It's like you're above it all, right?
Well, at least with Facebook, it's that. Well, okay. So at least the part that relates to actual people and their photos and their life updates, it's almost like it's so real because boomers treat it like they're talking on the telephone, like they spill their guts out, and it's very authentic for that reason. If for none other. Instagrams are probably a little bit different because everything's like the veneer of like, I've got to have that perfect shot and I'm only going to upload if I'm happy with it, and I've got to have the filter and all that, LinkedIn, I think it's similar to closer to the Instagram thing. So everything's very curated and cultivated, even to the point where, like you said, like when people are out of work, they go and do courses on how to like optimize their LinkedIn presence, and like I've seen this.
Yeah, I've been on one of those courses before a long time ago. It obviously didn't stick because my LinkedIn is pure trash. But the bit that really stuns me sometimes too is this. It's almost like a TED culture, TED Talk culture. It's like, it's almost like the expectation is that everyone has to give a TED Talk on LinkedIn, right? And then you go a bit further and it's like, oh, this is like the receptionist at a gym. But they're giving like a full video package TED Talk style presentation about like their plans, their motivations, their like, their... just like, why? Like,
I'll tell you the one thing I like about LinkedIn though is like the fall from grace, right? Where you see someone who, and it might be someone you've worked in like the past in a previous life, and maybe they had a good role or they had a senior role or whatever, but you can kind of see in hindsight like how far they've fallen from like. And there's just a feeling of it's fun to watch, to be able to spectate that. There's one guy that I'm connected with on LinkedIn, and he I'm trying to dance around it because I want to protect anonymity and all that sort of stuff. But he's just literally resorted now to like, I don't think he can find a job, so he's just literally resorted to like uploading these weird videos every like one a week where he tries to be motivational because he wants to like be your career coach. And except he looks really depressed. Like they're not very inspiring, or they're sort of attempted to, like they attempt to be inspiring, but in a really tone deaf way that it doesn't land.
Yeah. But see, that is like, okay, putting aside the fact that maybe he was forced into that, the coaching genre, I think, is something that does need reckless self-promotion, I think. There's no getting around it, right? Like if you're genuinely in that space, right? Like you'd have to do some things that you weren't so proud of, right?
It's like when people randomly reach out to you, like as part of like lead generation. So they're trying to find new clients, and they're just playing a numbers game. They're literally blasting like 10,000 people a week, and if you happen to reply saying, yeah, okay, we can have a chat or whatever, they're like, oh, it's a full scale like operation to deploy all strategic resources onto you because you've indicated you're willing to have a chat. Like it's and then that person quickly learns not to respond to such messages in the future. But yeah, anyway.
You know what's going to be interesting though, Andy, is like the day when you're going to have to do something similar to all the things you hate on LinkedIn, right? And because you can't sometimes control this. So that's why I said I do have sympathy for some people, right? But there's going to be a day where you're going to have to promote something where you're cutting something ribbon or doing some panel thing, and you're going to look at yourself in the mirror. You're going to remember this chat right now, and it's going to make it 10 times worse.
But you don't have to post it on LinkedIn. Like, I mean, you can do the vacuous activity without posting on LinkedIn. I think I mean, we should move on, but I think the critical part is just not to lose touch with like the way the rest of like, because if you're on LinkedIn and your perception of the world is geared by what people do on LinkedIn, and normalizes all this self-promotion, all that sort of stuff, and you think that that's okay and that's normal, it's just not to lose the center of gravity that actually most people don't do that stuff. And by you doing it, you're actually giving a signal of like something innate to your character. So it's not to lose touch with a bit of genuine humbleness, not just I'm like literally saying you're humbled when you're about to humble brag sort of thing.
Okay, we'll leave LinkedIn alone, but if this is adjacent, and it's just a small one, I just want to ask, I want to get a bit of a climate field test on the situation, right? So I know someone who is a regular poster to LinkedIn, right? And it's all not too bad. Usually it can even be lighthearted in a way, like very social media-y updates and dealings with the business and what he's doing and so on. But he flaunts a pretty high-priced luxury watch in his posts, right? So he has about 4 or 5 really high-end watches, right? And I'm talking, like, to give a reference point for people who aren't watch people, in these photos, he'll have like a Rolex Daytona, which, is about 80 grand, right? Like this kind of thing on his wrist, right? And not everyone would know that, but definitely people in the business world and in LinkedIn would catch that, right? Is that, is that a bit of a faux pas in your opinion?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I put the leap, the tangent or adjacent sort of image you conjure up in my mind is like real estate agents, right? How they're
always got to lease the car, like, and
the owner of the real estate agency in a hot property market's raking it in, but the junior burger who's like literally on a Saturday morning taking keys to houses and opening them so people can look at them is not.
Working the iPad, getting their names.
Yeah,
have you checked in?
That person still, like, as in the junior burger opening the door to the house to show them around, is still like rolling up in a pretty expensive car because it's all part of the marketing of like, hey, where like you've made it if you're selling it. As there's actually, it's more of a marketing to the tool to the sellers of the house to say, sell your property with us because we're successful. See, that's why like all of our agents are driving like Beamers or whatever, and I see that as a similar thing. It's a signal of like, but then that signal like can become very obnoxious, particularly when in the circumstance where it's like, yes, they have an $80,000 watch, but like that's not like that's not commensurate with their salary, right? They've like literally sacrificed a lot of things to buy that watch. Now, if on the other hand, like a CEO of an ASX listed company wore it, I'd probably just say, well, okay, you've got to spend your money on something, and maybe it wouldn't be a faux pas in the same way, but definitely, definitely in the context of these sort of settings.
Yeah, I think you're right with the real estate thing. There's nothing more visually off-putting than like a young chav real estate agent that's like quite young and obviously goes to the gym, so his suit's like really tight on him, and he's bought it from like Politics or something with an X. And but
MJ Bale.
Yeah, well, no, don't bring MJ Bale into this. You can't put Politics and MJ Bale on the same thing. That stuff's from Italy. Anyway, you can tell I have some MJ Bale. But Politics, right? And they got
I wear
skinny
Van Heusen, so
Yeah, look, but Politics, is known for that kind of like fuckboy suit, right?
Yeah,
where there's like
I know
skin tight.
I know what you're saying.
And,
but I do think MJ Bale is adjacent.
Oh, anyway, I'll let that one go.
I'm horrifying you.
Well, one's polyester, one's Super 100s. Anyway, so they rock up in that, right? But you're right; they're always driving a Beamer or an AMG. Right, so they're always very flashy, and it almost becomes part of the culture that you expect a kind of like dolled up real estate agent to be working the grounds, right? But you never really believe it, like you said, right? It's always just like an image thing. In the same way that like apprentice tradies are always known for having hotted up cars, and they're the least people that can afford it, right? It's just like a cultural thing. That's what you do with your style. But anyway, I just always thought that like people respond quite poorly in Australia to overt signs of wealth like that, like flashing such an expensive watch. But anyway,
isn't it just like knobheads that we're generally railing against here?
If you have an expensive watch, I don't automatically think knobhead. Just to be clear to anyone who has invested.
Well,
in a watch.
Can we not say though, like categorically, you probably are a knobhead if you spent $80,000 for a watch. Like genuinely,
everyone has their poison though, Andy.
No, but when $80,000 is like literally okay. Unless, as I said, unless you're like a CEO earning $1 million or more a year or something, $80,000 is like you've got to go to the bank for a loan to buy that.
But isn't it about priorities? So I know they come in pairs, right? But say if we were in our 20s, right, and you decided that what you wanted to do is buy a BMW M3, and you're going to take a loan out, and you're going to spend 70 grand or whatever on an M3. Like, I wouldn't instantly think that you're just like the most ridiculous human in the world. Like, you just could be a car guy.
Yeah, but that's a car, right? But I think a watch, all of this stuff. Okay, so you could say with a car, oh well, what's wrong with like a Toyota Corolla? Just get a Toyota Corolla. Yeah, okay, it's 3 times the price, or whatever multiple, right, for a car. But it's still a car, and there's a performance angle, and as you said, you can get into it. But like a watch, it comes down to like the intrinsic value, not the functional value, but the intrinsic value that you place into the mechanics beneath it.
Yeah, you can trick yourself into that, can't you?
Yeah, but like
it's the movement. I just really appreciate good engineering.
but that's literally the thing that you've paid $80,000 for. And whereas with the car, I think you can say that, well, there's some fundamental engineering differences that, and yes, there's part of it's to do with the prestige of like a Corolla versus a M3, but might contribute some of the cost. But I can kind of, even then, I'd say you're probably a knobhead if you've done that in your 20s. But nonetheless, like at least a second-hand one maybe is okay. But yeah, but $8,000 for a watch, I think. And even if you're a millionaire, like even if you're a billionaire, let's go one step further, right? This principle's the same. Like, why do you need to spend $80,000 for a watch? And you probably find most billionaires don't own a watch that costs more than like $10,000. Like, it'll be one of those things where...
Don't give me this Bill Gates and his Casio
No,
again.
but I just think, like, if you're a billionaire, you don't become a billionaire by, like, making shitty investments and purchases like that. Like, there's a certain utility behind the old...
but you know how these
I saw you
go.
rocking the calculator watch the other day. That probably
that was
cost...
an ironic retro purposeful choice. But you know how things go. You can't, like... It comes in pairs, man. Like, once your lifestyle upgrades, it upgrades, right? You can't go, oh, I'm gonna buy the waterfront property, but I'm still gonna drive the Yaris, right? No. You upgrade
Actually,
the car, you
that's
upgrade the clothes, you upgrade it all, right? It all comes together.
No, there's a thing. There's a whole thing about billionaires and millionaires and / billionaires, like, driving shitty cars. Like, that's the whole thing. Like, Warren Buffett, like, drives around in, like, some... I don't know what it is, but
it's all
it's
for
something
show, man.
very...
They say that, and then they've got a private jet. They've got, like, a Gulfstream, right? And there's, like... You know what I mean? Like, they go, oh, yeah.
That's just
like,
the car they have in that city. Like
Well, that famous thing with Bezos keeping his Honda Accord, right? He's like, hey, it's a perfectly good car.
But of course, they counter the very famous story of Elon Musk and his McLaren F1, right? Which he that was like the first thing he bought as soon as he made like $1 million, kind of thing. The most
you've read his biography, right?
Yeah.
Do they discuss how he got his hair back? Because I know for a fact that when that video where he got the delivery of his McLaren M3, and I think he just made it. You know, he came into a little bit of money. I think it was like PayPal or something. He was balding like a motherfucker. Like the hair was holding on by a thread, and now he's got the Iron Man kind of like quiff now. So, what has he done? What has he done?
Can launch rockets into outer space and basically invent, or at least turbocharge the adoption of electric cars on our roads.
Well, it's funny that you use that word adoption, because that's what I thought. Is that the reason he's having so many kids, so he can harvest their like hair follicles to keep him
all right. Enough of this slander. So on lighter topics, we thought we would discuss Israel-Palestine.
Oh, baby.
So I think we were discussing what we should talk about. Actually, we've been talking about doing an episode on this for quite some time, but we've not haven't found quite the right moment to do it. But we think we found it. And there's actually two things that happened this week that we'll put on the table first and maybe then have a chat about. Number one, Black Star pastry baristas wore kefirs, which I think are those terrorist-looking scarves, right?
You pronounced that right?
I don't know. How would you say it?
I don't know. Maybe in a dirty Arab kind of inflection, maybe.
Kefir. Kefir.
Yeah, something like that. I'm pretty sure it's not like kefir lime or kefir like
I think it is.
drink.
I think it's because I must admit I did do a on YouTube there's those like how to pronounce. I did do that. It was like kefir.
Oh, I can never use those because it comes in such a robotic voice that I don't understand it anyway.
Kefir. And they were sacked, right? So these now they're 22-year-olds working at like essentially baristas working in a cafe selling, various baked goods and coffees and the like to
famous
customers.
Patisserie, right?
Yeah. And they were wearing these. It's not part of uniform. I think they were counselled, told not to wear it, and then I think sacked the next day. But I'll be honest. I think that was probably like sacking them, in my views, probably, I think they should have been afforded a little bit of, yes, not good judgment, but like, let's just not make a mountain out of a molehill sort of thing. But they were sacked. But I think then I scrolled down and I looked at the picture of these two 22-year-old girls, and I was like, yeah, that was a good call to sack them. They just look like the cliche of a ignorant, naive, know-it-all, sort of early 20s who thinks they're all over everything, and this really complex issue that everyone's really grappling with, that they've got the solution, and let's wear, Palestine, things in support of like they've got little badges with the flag and so on. So there was that. The second one was, of course, if anyone's seen the clips of Jerry Seinfeld at his Sydney stand-up shows getting heckled with protesters chanting like from the river to the sea and interrupting the show and all that sort of stuff. So those were the two things that we thought we'd launch off into this topic this week.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like it's not that we haven't wanted to talk about Palestine and Israel and Gaza. It's just been hard, right? I think that this often happens with us where if you dedicate some meaningful time to do a proper episode and discussion on the topic, then you just feel like every other subsequent chat, it feels quite daunting, doesn't it? You don't want to be pulled back there and engage in some stuff, right? But you do still want to talk about it, and I think this is a good way to engage in some of the current events around it, but not go through the whole thing again, right? And try to dig it all up. It's funny, it's just so ironic that Black Star pastry. What is Black Star's pastry's most famous dessert?
Well, for anyone who doesn't know, it's the watermelon.
It's the watermelon cake. Isn't that just pure irony that like the watermelon is the symbol used for the Palestinian resistance and flag in all the protests, right? And that goes back to history around the fact that they couldn't actually put the flag up in some scenarios, but the watermelon obviously symbolizes all the colors of the Palestinian flag and has been long used in all the rallies as a sign of resistance against the aggression from Israel. So I just thought that right off the cuff was like hilarious, right? It's like, no, we don't want to tarnish our watermelon cake. It's not what you think it is. It's not showing solidarity with Palestine.
This happened. The cake was
total coincidence.
Well before October 7.
It's heavy-handed. All right, like obviously, I think that there's a risk, or there's a kind of a trap to fall into where just because what these women represent, which is like a very, like you said, naive, perhaps even gullible, simplistic view of what it means to be active in social causes, right, and political causes. There's a bit of a trap, or that you want to punish them, right?
Can I just add, like, I think just to like sketch out the caricature of these two individuals a little bit more. To me, it is relevant that they look like quintessentially. They're like hardcore whiteys who you can tell like grew up in a privileged middle class white household that are just literally grabbing onto this in the same way as they probably also grab onto climate change and every other social justice cause, right? This is for them like part of them fulfilling their identity as like liberal, progressive young people, right? And that's what makes it. Yeah, that's what hits a nerve. Anyway, sorry.
That is very relevant, right? We're not talking about two Middle Eastern women who are bringing their experience and their socialization and to the issue. But I just find that there's a trap that I have to catch myself from falling into, which is wanting to kind of punish them or harshly judge them because of what you mentioned, that they're just too whitey. They're two whiteys from Melbourne working at baristas, working in trying to attach their identity to whatever the hottest social justice, political justice craze is. But taking that aside, right, I do think it is a bit heavy-handed. And what is also relevant is I believe it was the Kefir week, right? It wasn't just like my understanding was it wasn't just like, oh, we'll just fight the man, and they called each other up the night before and said, let's wear the scarves. It was actually part of a wider organized week of showing support and resistance, right? So I think that's relevant too. I'm happy that Black Star took a stand, because I do think that you are just overwhelmed with this as a just general public, and you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to engage with this all the time, not on your terms, as just a consumer in a cafe or someone who's just walking around the city and trying to live your life. Like, I do think that is it should be kept out of business and should be kept into a space that people can engage with in the right way. And I don't think there needs to be a protest at every single turn and beat of life, right? So I do think it was a right decision, and I'm happy that they took a stand, but it was, from the sounds of it, it was heavy-handed. And as you said at the start of this, having hired and managed people ourselves, you know instinctively that every action has a reaction. And the way in which you deal with your staff, especially on the way out, makes a difference. In most cases, when you fire someone under some kind of grounds of discipline or whatever, there is usually a reaction. And that's what's happened in this case too, that they're suing Blackstar for wrongful dismissal or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, so I think, you know, just to your point, like on as a consumer, right, maybe to put it another way, it might seem heavy-handed in the sense of, well, you know, what's the big idea? They're just wearing some scarves to work or whatever. But, you know, this is a fairly contentious issue, like involving ethnic groups in the community. If you're, let's just say you happen to be of Jewish background, heritage, whatever, and you're in a shopping centre and you encounter this, every second person is like, maybe you're a customer of Black Star Pastry. Remember, like, they're the employer, right? So Black Star Pastry does not want to be having people of Jewish background not purchasing from them because they think, you know, their staff kind of represent everything against you, sort of thing.
Yeah, reputational damage, right?
Yeah, so I think that's so it might seem extreme of them to have terminated their employment and all the rest of it, but I can actually understand why they did that. And in fact, it was only after it went on social media, like pictures of them wearing this stuff, that they actually acted. But for me, the story isn't really that. I don't really care about like the ins and outs of like whether it was unfair dismissal or, you know, what's Black Star's Pastry's stance on the conflict, you know, in Israel and Palestine. Like, I don't care
Watermelon
about
cake has been cancelled.
Like that's actually not important. But for me, it's the whole caricature, and it's just like just another example, salient example of just how ignorant people are to everything involving this conflict, yet just how firm they are in their beliefs. So I think you and I, we've probably, you know, if you look at the average in Australia, we're probably well above the average in terms of like knowledge, in terms of things we've listened to, general engagement in, you know, we've listened to hours and hours and hours of podcasts, read hours, you know, of articles, whatever. And even we're still like struggling to really get our heads around the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah.
So I think what I would say is that it's very, very complicated, and it's possible to hold a position on both sides. It's possible to be pro-Palestinian after having done a lot of work to kind of understand the issues, and it's also possible to be pro-Israel after having been through the same journey. Because it's a lot of this stuff. It's like, well, where do you leap off from? Where's your like starting point? Where do you start from? And then, you know, that kind of tends to, what's the original like endowment position? Because that then frames, was October 7 just a retaliation, or was that the first offence, or was it 1948, or was it before that? And then what about the Holocaust and all these other things? But what's common among all of these, like young people on university campuses? You know, I saw someone riding a bike. You know, this girl riding her bike with a Palestinian flag. Again, another young whitey, progressive whitey. You know, that they don't know fucking shit all. You know, yet they're so confident in their position. Like they're just like they're screaming it from the rooftops. You know, oh, you know, this is outrageous, Israel, blah 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 blah, river to the sea, all this. They're not even just saying, oh well, we don't really like to see what Israel's doing, like in terms of their bombing, and we would really like them just to stop. That's actually not generally what they're saying. They're generally going further. And they're so confident, and they're so bold in everything, and their positioning and their advocacy. And it's just like, hey, it's complicated. Maybe you shouldn't be so sure. And just, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute, but you know, just, I want these people to realize that, like, hey, this is like a really traumatic conversation for both sides, for both Palestinians, people of that heritage, but also people of Jewish background who have a connection to Israel. And it's actually traumatic. It's not just that it's like, hey, which football side are you going to go for this season, right? This is actually traumatic. You've got the Holocaust that sort of goes back, like there's people living memory impacted by the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
And this is traumatic for them. And you're very naive and irresponsible if you think you're going to do your virtue signaling thing just to fit into your in-group, that you're a progressive person.
This, more than any other topic, I think, put me into a tailspin when it first came up. And I think we spent hours on the phone when I was processing things and the initial response from October 7th. And I think it awoken something in the consciousness, well, of myself, but a lot of people around the divide in society, right? Like with this, like how people respond to this kind of information. And I do think that, like we're a really good example of this, right? We have spent a lot of time, like you said, engaging with it. We have nuanced views on it, but we do have key differences between you and I, right? But they're not easily characterized by our outward support. So, which is what everyone wants, right? Everyone wants to know, are you with me or are you against me, right? You got the watermelon on you or you got the Star of David on you, right? That's what people want. And they're furiously looking for these signals to shortcut that other stuff because, like they said, it's complicated and they don't want to, in the words of someone like a Sam Harris, they want to do the work. They don't want to do the mental work to kind of engage with it, right? That's not what this is really about. And for most people, I'm not discounting all, but for most people, their advocacy was awoken from October the 7th. They jumped on that bandwagon. Like, I give you a little bit of respect if you were chipping away at this from like the Oslo Accords, right? If you're an old-time warrior. But this is not that, right? Like, especially for the younger people. Those people weren't even born, baby. Like, what are we talking about here, right? And I think that the hopelessness of it all is illustrated in this, right? And I think when this story broke, you and I were talking about that, and I said to you, I think at the time, have these people never been like to the Holocaust Museum? Because I know that you and I and everyone I know from our generation was taken there in school, right? We had an excursion to the Holocaust Museum where an actual survivor took us around on a tour. They told us the stories. We learnt about all the persecution and all that kind of stuff. And the reason I bring that up is not to just say, oh, the poor Jewish community, without any qualifying statements on what they've done. It's to emphasize your point around sensitivity. I truly believe that if you've been to the Holocaust Museum, if you have watched or viewed the footage and pictures from any of these attacks on both sides, October 7th or some of the horrifying pictures in Gaza, you can't act like this. Like, I actually think that you can't act like this because you too are somewhat traumatized, right? Like, I remember when I was in school and I came away fairly changed from the Holocaust Museum, right? Like, and hearing someone who was living, this elderly Jewish woman, recount experiences, like it changes you, and you don't act like a fuckwit trying to virtue signal after that, right? And whether that's happened to you only on one side, like you can only empathize with the Jewish experience or the Palestinian experience, fine. Maybe you need to even that up, but you just don't behave like this if you've truly tried to engage with it, and because you've taken on some of that trauma too. So I feel like that's a bit of a missing ingredient here. And I dare say that, like, if you took those two people to the Holocaust Museum after this, like, that would be a pretty good community service from a standpoint of view. Like, I think that would change their mind, and they're young enough to recover from this. And that's the bit that I worry about, right? Like, what does the trajectory look for these two 22-year-olds?
I just think generally a lot of the sentiments, and to be fair, I don't think it's just 22-year-olds. I see a lot of older people as well who
that's fair. That's
views.
Fair.
Like, they shortcut the whole problem of the Middle East and Israel-Palestine to, do you support killing babies? As though that's the question, right? and there's one side that supports killing babies and the other side that doesn't, right? And how it's just obvious, it's self-apparent which side you should be on. But of course, we know that that's totally not the question, right? Because the reason I think that going back to the Holocaust is actually quite important for a lot of these sorts of questions is because we have to sort of think back and track back to, that time where you had a lot of refugees, a lot of displacement of people in Europe. You had probably, I'm pretty sure it is the biggest single most evil act that has ever been perpetrated in the history of humanity, and against a people based on, I'm not sure if it's quite racial or /religious / how to really quite define it, but nonetheless,
one ethnic group.
Yeah. They like the Nazis had rule tables that if you had 3 grandparents that you were this, and if you had 2, then you were like half. What they actually they had bloody statistical tables to decide who would die. So I think you've got to go back to that. You've got to go back to the displacement. You've got to actually understand that Israel, in its modern formulation, basically the majority of people living there who formed the state of Israel actually came from that region, and then the rest were actually displaced people who had nowhere else to go, and there is no other place for them to go. You've got to remember, or accept that like people who modern day Palestinians were offered their own state. There was the 2-state solution was the original plan, was rejected. There were wars. All of these things are relevant, and then we've got to circle back to that. I actually wonder how many people truly understand what when people like the slogan "From the river to the sea," what that actually means to Jewish people. That's code. And do these 22-year-olds realize that's code to Jewish people for basically that you should all just you should all fuck off. Let's have Holocaust Mark II kind of thing. That's how it's received, right?
They put that back on them. I actually spoke to someone about this actually, who was I don't know if they're into rallies and stuff like that or whatever, but it sounds like basically they're they do it on the internet. They do it on Instagram, and they show a lot of overt support, right, for the Palestinian cause, in pretty harsh terms, reposting River to the Sea and all this kind of thing. And I talked to her about it, and I said, just a very simple answer, just very focused on that statement, from the river to the sea, right? And I said, what's the intent? What do you mean? And what do you think? How do you think it's received by the community, right? The Jewish diaspora, and all the things that you mentioned, right? The fact that Jewish people see that as no Jews are left in from the Mediterranean to the Jordan, which is the whole of Israel. No Jews in that part of the world, right? Get out, just go somewhere else, wherever you came from, go back. They put all of that on the Jewish people from interpretation. They're like, no, that's not what it means. It means that from the river to the sea, Palestinian people are free to exist. It doesn't mean that there's no Jewish people and all that kind of stuff. They just, it's like a bob and weave kind of situation, man. They just, if you question them about that, they'll just no, we're not saying exterminate all the Jews. We're just saying that they're not free now. The Palestinians are not free now. They need to be free all over Israel, right? And freedom means equal rights and the ability. But then when you dig into it, it's equal rights for military, all sorts of things that are just impractical. They don't mean extermination. And if the Jewish people think that, and they've got some trauma response around that, that's their problem. It's not my responsibility. And that definitely seems to be the attitude that was presented back to me.
I actually think logically that sounds reasonable, right? That sounds, okay, all right, good. Yeah, you just there's some vision of because we have to remember Palestine, that's what that part of the world used to be called when there were Jewish people living there and Muslims living there. So it's got this historical continuity, and then the political state of Israel is sort of a modern thing. But and so maybe what they're saying is, we want to go back to that. But I would circle back to one of my earlier points, which is that you know, like, if you don't understand how those words are being received, then maybe you should just be quiet and not say them. Like, because you don't understand enough about the history of this conflict, you don't understand about all the trauma and that, like, because they're saying it, and you know what? Like, that's a bit like saying, well, I'm going to say the N word, but what I really just mean it is that you're like, I don't mean it in an offensive way. I've confected some other explanation. And if you take offense from it or you're triggered by it, that's on you, right? Now that's probably I'm not sure if the analogy is quite perfect, but
no, it's pretty good just because of the related trauma, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously part of their slogans and their campaigning because it triggers them, right?
And my problem is it's like an ever expanding airbag, right? It didn't start that way. It's like if you really wanted to give that message, you wouldn't lead with that, right? It's a post-rationalized message to worm out of the more extreme versions of what from the river to the sea means, right? And yeah, it's a really tough thing to take. And look, the timeline's all wrong with this, right? Like even the way the animosity built from the start, like even before where we are now, right? But yeah, I go back to like whether it's people that are stuck in this view or attracted to this cause because it aligns with their identity and things like that. It's very, very hard to behave this way if you've tried to engage with a topic in a meaningful way without prejudice. And let's be honest, like this should be like money for jam in that respect, right? Like you've got the Middle Eastern people who are intimately affected. You've got a tiny proportion of Jewish people that are actually affected and carry this weight in their socialization and culture. And then you've got all the rest of us whiteys or non-combatants, right? Shouldn't we, as the majority, try to provide some like impartial view of this instead of just...
Or maybe just be moderate.
spinning out like in a centrifuge? You just be moderate, just be the middle, right? Because you have no relationship. You know, you don't know any Jews, you don't know any people from Palestine, or Gaza more specifically. Why? And like you said, these two baristas were whiteys. Like, you don't know shit, right? Like, you don't know what it's like to live in a war-torn country. You don't know what it's like to have neighbors. Like, put it this way, right? If Israel is painted to be so powerful and so dominating, David and Goliath, which, God, is ironic coming from, like, the Jewish history of the Bible. If they're the Goliath in this situation, right, then you have to really think about what that means. They have a system called Iron Dome. It literally intercepts rockets that are shot at Israel mid-flight, right? It's a aerial defense system, and it is used and tested thoroughly, right? Does that sound like Goliath to you? Like, how did you get to the stage where instead of stopping your neighbors shooting missiles at you, you've somehow convinced everyone who lives in your country under your protection, your rule, that no, that's okay. We're not gonna deal with this situation. We're just gonna create a fucking Iron Dome that intercepts ballistic missiles that are shot at our country and our citizens. So that's okay. That's good. And now we'll switch the metric to, is that Iron Dome working effectively enough as a sign of good government rather than actually dealing with the reality that your neighbors are shooting fucking missiles at you?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that I think we've spoken about is that you don't have to, like, none of this conversation today is contingent on being pro-Israel, right? So, like, you can have a, and I think we probably both do in our own ways, like a view that, like, we actually don't know. Like there's so much layers of complexity to this that to sort of somehow, you know, like navigate all of the complex history and all of the complexities of the military decision making and then the ethics of, you know, the conflict and the, you know, the humanitarian consequences to lives and children and all that. That you can just sort of say, look, that's a black box. We can't possibly unpack that. And I think that would be my view, that no one can actually. Like, it's impossible because those closest to it then have another problem where they're too wedded to it, and they're too, like, they've got their own tribalism and biases that they're grappling with the closer they're to it, but then they're the people who are close enough to it to actually have a better grasp of those things. So it's very hard to navigate this in a really good way. But what I can say is that a 20-year-old on a university campus certainly hasn't solved it, right? And so treating the conflict itself, like, I think you and I would both agree that it's not good that, because I think we have to acknowledge that, the bulk of the deaths in the last, let's say, since October 7 have been on the Palestinian side, right? So in terms of, like, devastation, it has been in Gaza, right? And that's what I think the bulk of the population here, like the 22-year-olds that wear the kafirs and all that, like, that's what they're reacting to. They're reacting to that superficial layer of the the issue, right? But I think that's what we're calling out. We're calling out that you can't just look at this one thing in isolation. You've got to look at it more holistically. You've got to accept there's a lot of complicated history. You've got to acknowledge that, hey, if this were, like, let's say this were Australia, and let's say New Zealand was, had some territorial claims on us here in Australia, or, whatever, and then they were sending rockets over, like, what would we do? And, what, like,
be more Canberra and Sydney would be a better situation there.
No, I don't think anyone would want a piece of Canberra anyway, so you'd be all right. But
we wouldn't build a fucking Iron Dome over Sydney if Canberra was shooting rockets at us.
I think the point is that if you go to bed at night and you're worried about, like, whether you're going to wake up the next morning because of rockets and all that, and your security, you're suddenly going to vote. Like, you're voting at the ballot box in a democratic situation is going to be very different to, like, here we debate about, like, the big controversy at the moment is our opposition leader Peter Dutton's proposed to build some nuclear power plants. And this is the big thing grappling in Australian politics at the moment. Well, imagine you're in Israel, or you're in a country, let's even put Israel out of the question. Like, you're in a country, some generic country somewhere, and your people are being bombed every night. Or that's the potential possibility, or you could be invaded at any time. Like, you're not going to be worrying about these trivial issues. You're going to be worrying about, like, stuff that actually matters to your people, and it's security, it's safety, and it's so you can't possibly think about this issue when you're protected. I don't know how many thousand kilometers away we are, but when you go home and you stay at your parents', probably some, luxurious mansion on the North Shore of Sydney or somewhere like that, and you go home at night, you don't pay rent, or maybe you collect, youth allowance, Centrelink or something while you go to university and study. You don't have to worry about these things, but the people living in Israel do.
Yeah. What if there was a way that, like, someone knitted Kenny Rogers style, like, a kafir down one half of the skull, and, like, the Star of David on the other half, and it was, like, to represent the hostages on both sides that were being wrongfully held? Wouldn't that be just, like, amazing? Because it would refocus the situation on, like, some of the original humanitarian aspects of this particular war that or at least claim to be at the center of the ceasefire negotiations. Wouldn't that be so much better? Such a better kind of powerful stance. Like, in fact, I don't think anyone has ever done it. That's what we should do. We should actually commission a half-half scarf, and people wear that in solidarity for the victims, the hostages being held on both sides that are at the bottom of this, right?
I think the two halves of the scarf would, the dye would be, like, seeping in from either side.
Who would make it? Who would manufacture it for us?
Well, and this is the other thing, like, just as an aside, all the companies, it's not even Israeli companies that are being boycotted now. It's just, like, any company that supplies anything to Israel.
Like Starbucks? Like, you're going to boycott? Like, number one, no one's going to keep up with a boycott of Starbucks because it's
maybe Starbucks can sell that scarf as part of their merch collection.
Oh yeah, but seriously, like I reckon that's a good way for our show to go viral. For you and I to be in a fucking half kefir, Star of David do rag, and that's going to go viral, man. That's definitely going to go viral. But you know what I mean, right? Like, isn't that the most? If you wanted to be like, you know, peace not war, isn't that the best place to start?
I think that's too hard for people to. They don't. You know, it's a bit like what you've outlined is a bit like suggesting someone will go to a football match supporting both sides. Like, people's human nature isn't for that. Like, people want to pick a side and they want to go for it and they want to enjoy the tribalism of going for one side over the other. And I think that's what I would be reacting to with all this. So I can totally see like how someone would be anti-Israel. Like, I could totally get that. Like, I think the numbers speak for themselves. I think it does matter that, you know, tens of thousands of people have lost their lives at the hands of Israel bombing campaigns. I think that's relevant. And I think it's relevant that it's not even necessarily like a good strategic decision or move or tactics. I mean, I'm not a
but
strategist,
we don't know that.
So I'm not gonna venture into that. But I can see how you could, fit on that side.
Yeah,
but
of course,
I just think you got to do the work. But I think we should touch on Jerry Seinfeld's heckling. I might just play some bits now before we get into it.
We have a genius, ladies and gentlemen. He solved the Middle East. He solved it. It's the Jewish comedians. That's who we have to get. They're the ones doing everything. Yeah, go ahead, keep going. They're going to start punching you in about 3 seconds, so I would try and get all of your genius out so we can all learn from you. It's a comedy show, you moron. Get out of here. Imagine if this guy actually did solve the Yes, so you're really influencing everyone here. We're all on your side now because you have made your point so well and in the right venue. You've come to the right place for a political conversation. Tomorrow we will read in the paper, Middle East 100% solved thanks to man at the Kudos Arena stopping Jew comedian. They stopped him and everyone in the Middle East went, oh my God, let's just get along. We can't do that.
We got a genius, everybody.
All right, so hello, listeners. Roger and I, we got a little bit carried away with this discussion. Roger, do you want to explain what happened?
Well, so we wanted to revisit some of the Palestinian protesters and how they impacted Jerry Seinfeld. And we couldn't help ourselves. We got kind of carried away back into a more conceptual argument around the conflict. And so what we really wanted to separate this out for our listeners who perhaps are not up for that. So we're going to cut that for a second episode next week. So tune in if you have the stomach.